What's going on? YouTube, listen up, young elder gang. This is Chief Whitebird at you with another banger. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video, fam. I hope this video get at least 100,000 likes in this video. You will find history definitions, scripture information, and best of all, what we Americans have been deprived of from the beginning. The truth, keep in mind, this content used in this video is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. We will give you the total truth as we best understand it today. Be sure to hit that like button, young elder gang, hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel, hit that bell, and don't forget to check back with us every day for new content. This is the director's vision, bringing Lincoln, the vampire hunter, to the stage. The secret plot, why elite bankers wanted Lincoln gone. Those who put the play on Old Man Lincoln. You see, the word on the streets from those who sit down at the bottom is that President Abraham Lincoln appealed to the Moorish crown's perennial enemy, Russia, for assistance. The crown and the Pope didn't take to kind with Lincoln wanting to get in bed with the Russians. In politics, getting in bed with someone, or being in bed with someone, is an idiom used to describe a close working relationship, collaboration, or alliance between individuals, groups, or entities. Essentially, it means that the parties are working together in a way that can make others question their motives or trustworthiness. Some people believe that the media is in bed with the political establishment, influencing the way stories are reported. But anyway, President Abraham Lincoln sent a letter of appeal. When the envelope, allegedly containing Mr. Lincoln's urgent appeal, was given to Tsar Alexander II, it has been postulated that he weighed it unopened in his hand and stated, "Before we open this paper or know its contents, we grant any request it may contain." Alexander II was Emperor of Russia, King of Poland, and Grand Duke of Finland from the 2nd of March 1855 until his assassination in 1881. I wonder if what was in the appeal from Lincoln got him whacked as well. But anyway, unfortunately, a few weeks after the introduction of the urgent appeal from Mr. Abraham Lincoln to Tsar Alexander, Tsar Alexander II is killed in the streets of St. Petersburg by a bomb thrown by a member of the Revolutionary People's Will group. The People's Will employed terrorism and assassination in their attempt to overthrow Russia's czarist autocracy. They worked for the Black Hand. Now, if you want to tick the wise guys off at the top, go jacking around with the way they make their money. That's definitely a fast way to find yourself sleeping with the fishes. Once Lincoln cut them off, the government wasn't operating fully under the authority of private international law dictated by the creditor. Further, Lincoln quoted, "The privilege of creating and issuing money is not only the supreme prerogative of government, but it is the government's greatest opportunity." You see, the reason they put the play on Mr. Abraham Lincoln is because he was messing with the Moorish crown and the Pope's money by printing interest-free money to pay for the war efforts. The world elite bankers couldn't make no more money off interest. The guys at the top didn't take too kind to this. They had spent a long time setting up their business, the Matrix, and had it running like a well-oiled machine. Then comes Lincoln with his nappy hair, soft heart, and good-looking teeth, with his pretty boy Kool-Aid smile, trying to change everything back to normal. The Moorish British crown has viewed Russia as a perennial enemy due to a combination of historical, geopolitical, and ideological factors. For centuries, Great Britain, the Moors, which the Moorish Empire and Russia were powerful rivals, competing for influence and control over various regions, particularly in Central Asia, a period known as the Great Game. Russia's desire for warm water ports and access to the Mediterranean through the Moorish Ottoman Empire threatened British-Moorish trade routes and influence in the Middle East. Britain Moors were deeply concerned about Russian expansion into Central Asia, viewing it as a potential threat to their control over India, their most valuable colony. Britain Moors frequently supported the Ottoman Moorish Empire to prevent Russia from gaining control of strategically vital areas like the Dardanelles, which would have given Russia unchecked access to the Mediterranean. As Britain Moors evolved into a parliamentary democracy, Russia remained an autocracy, leading to inherent ideological friction. The Bolshevik Revolution, nationalization of Western assets, and promotion of global communism further exacerbated tensions and fueled antagonism between Britain Moors and the Soviet Union. The Crimean War, 1853 to 1856, where Britain Moors and France fought against Russia to protect the Ottoman Moorish Empire, solidified Anglo-Russian hostility. During the Russian Civil War, Briton Moors supported the anti-communist White Army, although ultimately unsuccessfully. During the Cold War, Briton Moors, as a key NATO member, viewed the Soviet Union as a major adversary, engaged in a decades-long rivalry that played out in various proxy conflicts around the globe. Recent events like the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko and the Skripal poisoning have further strained relations and highlighted Russia's perceived hostile actions against Briton Moors. The ongoing Russo-Ukrainian war has led to a complete collapse of relations, with Briton Moors providing significant support to Ukraine and imposing sanctions on Russia. In summary, the perception of Russia as a perennial enemy of the Moorish crown is rooted in centuries of conflicting geopolitical ambitions, different political ideologies, and specific historical conflicts that have shaped the relationship between the two nations. Why did they make Abraham Lincoln white? Well, that's a good question. They used an actor, President Jefferson Davis, to switch him out. Individuals who were so-called black or dark-skinned in history are depicted as white or pale. This is what you term whitewashing, which serve various purposes related to reinforcing and maintaining a particular social or political agenda, and is a phase of colonization. One of the number one things is to maintaining social hierarchy and power dynamics, reinforcing white supremacy. Historically, the notion of racial hierarchies positioned free white people at the top, justifying colonization, slavery of indigenous people, and other forms of oppression against non-free white populations. Whitewashing historical narratives by replacing or omitting the contributions and significance of so-called black native individuals could perpetuate the myth of white superiority and maintain existing power structures. By controlling historical narratives and depicting a world where white individuals are the primary agents of change and progress, it solidifies and reinforces the dominant group's position and influence. Whitewashing can be a way to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about historical injustices like slavery of Native people and racial discrimination. By presenting a narrative that minimizes the role of white individuals in oppression, or even portrays historical figures like slave owners as virtuous, it potentially diminishes the feelings of guilt or responsibility among the white population. In a revised historical narrative, portraying historical figures as whites, even if they were not, could be intended to cultivate a certain form of national pride or a sense of shared heritage centered around a specific racial identity. Replacing or erasing black individuals from historical narratives can lead to a sense of invisibility and disconnection from cultural heritage for so-called black individuals and communities. Whitewashing can downplay the achievements and contributions of so-called black individuals, making it seem as though progress and innovation primarily came from white people. It's crucial to acknowledge that such historical revisionism is fundamentally inaccurate and harmful. It distorts the truth and prevents a comprehensive and honest understanding of the past. The psychological impact of historical erasure and misrepresentation on those from marginalized groups can be significant, potentially leading to identity confusion, diminished self-esteem, and feelings of not belonging. Without an accurate understanding of history and the injustices of the past, addressing present-day inequalities and working towards a more just society becomes incredibly difficult. In short, the act of whitewashing history would be driven by a desire to maintain power, control narratives, and potentially avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about race and history. Let me give you a little background on Lincoln. I'm going to let you in on something most history books skip over: the real Abraham Lincoln. Not just the tall guy on the penny, but a man who battled poverty, tragedy, and crushing self-doubt before he ever set foot in the White House. Lincoln was born in a one-room log cabin in Kentucky with dirt floors and a family that could barely scrape by. His mom died when he was only 9. His father couldn't read and expected little Abe to work the land, not bury his nose in books. But Lincoln's secret weapon was his hunger to learn, sneaking in scraps of reading whenever he could, even if his dad thought it was laziness. By his 20s, Lincoln was broke, in debt from a failed store, and had lost the love of his life. He suffered deep depression, what folks then called melancholy, and honestly, he sometimes wanted to give up, but he didn't. He pushed through, working odd jobs, splitting rails, and reading law books late into the night. When he finally made it into politics, Lincoln wasn't some smooth-talking powerhouse. He lost more races than he won. His speeches were awkward, his looks unusual, but his honesty and empathy made people listen. They called him Honest Abe. Behind those folksy jokes was a mind that never stopped grinding. Even as president, Lincoln was haunted by grief. He lost 2 sons, endured a brutal civil war, and faced enemies both in the South and in his own cabinet. He was so racked by pressure and loss that friends worried about his health and his life. But here's the thing. Lincoln's pain shaped his power. He knew what it meant to struggle, so he fought to make America better, even when it nearly broke him. That's Lincoln's real story. Not just a legend, but a human being who turned pain into purpose. If you ever feel like the odds are stacked against you, remember Honest Abe? Sometimes the roughest roads lead you exactly where you're meant to be. The Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the nation, outlining the structure and functions of the federal government. It's a written charter that defines the powers of the government, protects the rights of citizens, and establishes the framework for how the government operates. A group of Moorish Zionist guys, original vampires, through their agents, employees of United States, Inc. and their subcorporations, began, under the Lincoln administration, to quietly hijack the Constitution and the 3 branches of the constitutional republic. A quasi-governmental corporate takeover was then engineered to take control of the 50 states, the banking system, and the coining and printing of money. A civil war, a bankruptcy, and the confiscation of the wealth of the nation were sponsored in order to create a context, read emergency, for the enslavement of the formerly sovereign people of the 50 formerly sovereign states under color of law. Here's the icing on the cake. In 1938, the rulings of the Supreme Court were then partitioned to prevent the invocation of any law based on the common law, to be replaced by the Uniform Commercial Code and Courts of International Contract Law, Admiralty. The coup d'etat is that most of you don't even realize that you have personally aided and abetted by your own ignorance of history and the law, signed and acted yourself into this system of commercial slavery. You do this every time you get a job, get married, give birth, register your car, take out a mortgage, use Federal Reserve notes, or join the military. Welcome to the same old world order. We have seen the enemy, and the enemy is ourselves. Abraham Lincoln was a secret vampire hunter, blending historical events with the supernatural. Lincoln was a lifelong vampire hunter, driven by personal tragedy and a mission to stop vampires from manipulating and exploiting humanity, particularly during the Civil War. Lincoln's childhood and early life are intertwined with his vampire hunter activities, where he learns to combat these creatures. If you want to know who the real vampires are, get the video, The Origin of the Vampires, for free in the links in the description. The story reimagines the Civil War with vampires playing a significant role, particularly on the Confederate side. Vampires are depicted as a powerful parasitic race that manipulates human society, including slave ownership and manipulation of the war. Lincoln's presidency is portrayed through the lens of his vampire hunter identity, with him utilizing his position to fight vampires. Lincoln develops a mentorship with Henry Clay, a vampire who teaches him the skills needed to hunt and kill vampires. Henry Clay was an American lawyer and statesman who represented Kentucky in both the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. He was the 7th House Speaker as well as the 9th Secretary of State. He unsuccessfully ran for president in the 1824, 1832, and 1844 elections. While still a boy, Abraham Lincoln loses his mother to a vampire's bite. He vows revenge but fails in the attempt, narrowly escaping with his life. He is rescued by William H. Seward, a charismatic vampire hunter who instructs Abraham in the fine art of dispatching bloodsuckers. Abe continues his fight against the undead well into adulthood and his presidency, making a last stand against the ultimate vampire foe, Stand Watie, on the eve of the Civil War's defining battle. In 1818, Abraham Lincoln lives in Indiana with parents Nancy and Thomas, who works at a plantation owned by Jack Bartz. He moved with his family to southern Indiana in 1816 when he was 7 years old, and they lived there until 1830 when he was 21. This period is considered his formative years. He lived on a 160-acre claim near Little Pigeon Creek. There, Lincoln befriends a young Native American boy, William Johnson, and intervenes when Johnson is beaten by a slaver. Because of this, Thomas is fired. That night, Lincoln sees Barts break into their home and attack Nancy, who falls ill and dies the next day. Nancy Lincoln died on October 5, 1818, at the age of 34. It is believed that she died of milk sickness, a poisoning that affects individuals who ingest milk, other dairy products, or meat from a cow that has fed on white snakeroot plant. 9 years later, Lincoln attempts to kill Barts at the docks in revenge, but discovers that he is a vampire. Before Barts can kill him, Lincoln is rescued by Henry Sturgis, who he had met earlier at a bar. Sturgis offers to teach Lincoln how to be a vampire hunter, and he accepts. After a decade of training, they travel to Springfield, Illinois. Sturgis explains that the vampires in the United States descend from Jacobite, group of powerful vampires who owns a plantation in New Orleans with his free, white front men as slave masters. William reveals the vampire's weakness is silver and presents him with a silver pocket watch. In Springfield, Lincoln begins hunting vampires named in letters by Williams, befriends shopkeeper Joshua Speed, and meets Mary Todd. Abraham Lincoln's friend, Joshua Fry Speed, was a shopkeeper in Springfield, Illinois, where they first met in 1837. Speed co-owned a general store and offered Lincoln lodging, eventually becoming a lifelong friend and confidant. They shared a room for 4 years, and Speed introduced Lincoln to his future wife, Mary Todd. Speed also played a role in Lincoln's career by introducing him to a law office. In the 1860 presidential election, Abraham Lincoln ran against 3 main opponents: Stephen Douglas, Democrat, a senator from Illinois, and Lincoln's longtime political rival. He represented the Northern Democrats and was known for his popular sovereignty stance on slavery of natives in the territories. John C. Breckinridge, Southern Democrat, the incumbent vice president. He represented the southern wing of the Democratic Party and supported the expansion of slavery of natives. John Bell, Constitutional Union, a former senator from Tennessee. He represented the newly formed Constitutional Union Party, which aimed to preserve the Union and avoid the divisive issue of slavery of natives. Shortly thereafter, Abraham Lincoln became president, being inaugurated on March 4, 1861. Lincoln immediately ordered a blockade on southern ports to cut off supplies that were pouring in from Europe, cutting off the Moore dope pile line. Lincoln really pissed these guys off. The official date for the start of the Civil War is given as April 12, 1861, when Fort Sumter in South Carolina was bombarded by the Confederates, but it obviously began at a much earlier date. During his presidency, Abraham Lincoln and Treasury Secretary Salmon P. Chase borrowed money from banks, American citizens, and foreign governments to finance the Civil War. They also implemented the first general income tax and printed greenbacks to cover the war's costs. During the Civil War, President Lincoln and Treasury Secretary Chase sought loans from banks along the eastern seaboard, totaling $50 million in gold. The United States also borrowed from foreign governments to support the war effort. President Lincoln faced a monumental task, financing the Union war effort. European bankers offered loans at exorbitant interest rates, 24 to 36%. Lincoln recoiled. He would not plunge the nation into such crippling debt. He sought another way, a path to financial sovereignty. He found it in the Constitution, the power to issue currency. In 1862, Congress passed the Legal Tender Act, authorizing greenbacks, United States notes, paper money, backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government, not by gold, not by silver, but by the people themselves. This was revolutionary. Debt-free money issued directly by the government. It allowed Lincoln to fund the war, to pay soldiers, to buy supplies, without enriching foreign financiers. He declared it the greatest blessing the American people had ever received, a way to control their own destiny, free from the grip of international bankers. The greenbacks worked. The Union economy, though strained, did not collapse under foreign debt. Lincoln spoke of this power. The Civil War had ended just days before. America was breathless. Wounded, yet hopeful, President Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, sought to heal a fractured land. But on Good Friday, April 14, 1865, while attending a special performance of the comedy, Our American Cousin, accompanying him at Ford's Theater that night with his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, a 28-year-old officer named Major Henry R. Rathbone, and Rathbone's fiancée, Clara Harris. After the play was in progress, a figure with a drawn Derringer pistol stepped into the presidential box. aimed, and a single shot rang out. Bang! The president slumped forward. At almost the same moment, Booth fired the fatal shot. His accomplice, Lewis Powell, alias Lewis Payne, attacked Lincoln's Secretary of State, William Henry Seward, at his home on Lafayette Square. The assassin, John Wilkes Booth, a trained Knight of Templar assassin, dropped the pistol and waved a dagger. Rathbone lunged at him, and though slashed in the arm, forced the killer to the railing. Booth leapt from the balcony and caught the spur of his left boot on a flag draped over the rail and broke a bone in his leg on landing. Though injured, he rushed out the back door and disappeared into the night on horseback. Darkness fell in Ford's Theater. The news spread like wildfire, across telegraph lines, through hushed conversations. Lincoln was dead, assassinated. Meanwhile, they tried to put the play on William Seward. William Henry Seward lay in bed, recovering from a carriage accident. Powell entered the mansion claiming to have a delivery of medicine from the secretary's doctor. Seward's son, Frederick, was brutally beaten while trying to keep Powell from his father's door. Powell slashed the secretary's throat twice, then fought his way past Seward's son, Augustus, an attending hospital corps veteran and a State Department messenger. Powell escaped into the night, believing his deed complete. However, a metal surgical collar saved Seward from certain death. The secretary lived another 7 years, during which he retained his seat with the Johnson administration and purchased Alaska from Russia in 1867. After Lincoln assassination, the nation plunged into grief and profound confusion. Who truly pulled the strings? Was John Wilkes Booth a lone madman, or a pawn in a larger, more sinister game? The official story emerged quickly. Booth, a Confederate sympathizer, part of a conspiracy to decapitate the Union government. Yet for many, questions lingered. The plot seemed too convenient, too neat for such a monumental crime. Were there deeper motives? Forces operating in the shadows? A nation demanded answers. The air itself felt heavy, with unspoken fears. The war had torn families apart, brother against brother. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, he had a $5 Confederate States of America note in his pocket. He also had other items, including 2 pairs of spectacles, a lens polisher, a pocket knife, a watch fob, a handkerchief, and some newspaper clippings. They found out there were at least 4 conspirators in addition to Booth involved in the mayhem. Booth was shot and captured while hiding in a barn near Bowling Green, Virginia, and died later the same day, April 26, 1865. 4 co-conspirators, Powell, George Atzerodt, David Harold, and Mary Surratt, were hanged at the gallows of the old penitentiary on the site of present-day Fort McNair on July 7, 1865. John Wilkes Booth, a Knight of Templar, made his reasons for the assassination of Lincoln, people say. Most Americans know that John Wilkes Booth, the Knights of Templar, murdered President Lincoln. Often overlooked, however, is Booth's participation in a larger knowledge to simultaneously kill Lincoln, Vice President Andrew Johnson, Secretary of State William Seward, and the nation's top military leader Ulysses S. Grant. Booth was going to kill Lincoln and Grant, who originally was supposed to attend the theater with the president on the night of the assassination. A man named George Atzerodt was to go after Johnson. Powell's assignment was to kill Seward, and he very nearly succeeded. They say John Wilkes Booth's diary entries stated that he hated Abraham Lincoln with a passion. He supported the Confederacy. He was much in demand as an actor in the South during the Civil War. He was an outspoken advocate of slavery of Native people. He had been in the Richmond militia that executed John Brown. John Wilkes Booth was a stage actor. He was a famous performer known for his Shakespearean roles and his energetic style. Booth also ripped pages out of his diary and apparently burned some of them. Therefore, there have grown up endless theories about his connection to the Moorish crown and the Templars. They say he gave the diary to a fellow actor who, however, is said to have burned the article so that no one will ever know what Booth wrote therein. But the facts about Booth are well enough established. There was more than one witness to the assassination attempt at the theater and to Booth's escape. We have already seen evidence that the international bankers will go to extraordinary measures to get what they want. There is some evidence to indicate that the powerful international bankers who gave us the Federal Reserve System will stop at nothing to have the power of a central bank solely in their hands alone. 3 acting American presidents have expressed concern over central banks issuing currency. Each of these acting presidents have been whacked. In mafia slang, whacked or whacked means to murder someone, particularly within the context of organized crime. It's a term used to describe a hit or killing within the criminal underworld. The so-called President Abraham Lincoln planned to issue non-interest-bearing notes he called greenbacks. The so-called President James A. Garfield made a pronouncement on currency problems just before he was whacked. And the acting president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, planned to issue federal United States notes without using the Federal Reserve notes or involving interest just before he was whacked. It would be difficult to prove that the international bankers were involved in these hits, but it is a very strange coincidence that presents more than a shadow of reasonable doubt that the hits could not have been done by any other group of people than the international bankers. Who else would have had the power and influence, both outside and inside of the military social government construct, to successfully cover up events as well as has been done? The international bankers can refer to several groups, including the Institute of International Bankers, IIB, the Worshipful Company of International Bankers, and the broader concept of international banking. The IIB is a trade association representing international banks operating in the United States, advocating for their interests in legislative and regulatory matters. The Worshipful Company of International Bankers is a professional organization with members from various financial disciplines. International banking in general refers to the services and transactions provided by banks across international borders to facilitate trade and investment. The elite bankers wanted Abraham Lincoln gone due to several of his financial policies and actions that challenged their interests and the prevailing economic order of the time. Lincoln's push for a national banking system. Before the Civil War, the U.S. banking system was largely decentralized with banks chartered at the state level. This system was chaotic and inconsistent, with different currencies and regulations across states which hindered the formation of a unified national economy. Lincoln, alongside his Treasury Secretary Salmon P. Chase, envisioned a national banking system to standardize currency, stabilize credit, and strengthen the Union, according to the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, OCC. The National Banking Act of 1863 laid the groundwork for this system, requiring nationally chartered banks to purchase government bonds as security for issuing their own banknotes. This created a demand for government bonds, boosting the Union's war financing, but also introduced federal oversight and competition for existing state banks, which some may have resented. Similar to Andrew Jackson's veto of the Second Bank of the United States, some opposed a national banking system due to concerns about centralized power and favoring wealthy elites over the working class. Facing the enormous costs of the Civil War, Lincoln's administration opted to print paper money, or greenbacks, rather than solely relying on loans from bankers. This policy was a radical shift from the traditional gold and silver-backed currency, viewed with skepticism by some conservative financiers. This move could have been seen as a threat to the established financial system and the influence of bankers who profited from issuing loans and controlling the money supply. Lincoln's election and the subsequent threat of secession concerned Northern merchants and bankers who had significant financial ties with the South, fearing the repudiation of Southern debts amounting to over $200 million. Impact on speculation. Some people suggest that European bankers, particularly the Rothschilds, opposed Lincoln's policies because they interfered with commodity speculation, particularly on Southern products. Some sources indicate that Lincoln might have reversed the National Bank Act and returned to a gold standard after the war, which could have negatively impacted bankers who benefited from the paper money system. Lincoln's planned mild Reconstruction policy, which aimed for a quick return to agricultural production, could have disrupted potential post-war speculation on high prices by financial institutions. In summary, the elite bankers wanted Lincoln gone due to his policies that aimed to centralize the banking system, introduce a new form of currency, and potentially disrupt established financial practices, all of which could have challenged their economic interests and influence. Lincoln's greenback sent shockwaves through the halls of Moorish European finance. This was a direct challenge to their established order. For centuries they held power by controlling nations' debts, lending money created from nothing, at interest, a nation printing its own money. This was an existential threat. Powerful banking families in London, Paris, and Frankfurt watched with growing alarm. If Lincoln succeeded, if America thrived with debt-free currency, Other nations might follow. Their lucrative business model of lending and controlling would crumble. This could not be allowed. The Times of London, a paper often reflecting the views of British financiers, wrote damningly of Lincoln's policy. It stated that if this mischievous policy became permanent, the American government would furnish its own money without cost. It would pay off debts and become prosperous beyond precedent. This, they declared, must be destroyed. The motivation, therefore, was clear. For these powerful interests, Lincoln was more than a wartime leader. He was a financial renegade. Lincoln's greenbacks were a form of paper money, specifically United States notes, issued by the Union government during the Civil War to help finance the war effort. They were printed with green ink on the back and were legal tender, meaning they had to be accepted in payment for goods and services. The greenbacks were a response to the financial challenges of the Civil War, as the Union government needed to raise large sums of money quickly to pay for troops, supplies, and other war-related expenses. The Legal Tender Act of 1862 authorized the issuance of greenbacks, making them legal tender for most purposes, meaning they could be used as currency alongside gold and silver. Unlike some earlier forms of paper money, greenbacks were not backed by gold or silver reserves. This meant their value was based on the federal government's credit and its ability to redeem them for gold at a later date. The name greenback came from the green ink on the back of the paper money. The greenbacks played a significant role in funding the Union war effort, but they also led to some economic challenges, including inflation, as the government printed large quantities of paper money. After the Civil War, the greenbacks were eventually redeemed for gold, and the country shifted towards a more gold-backed monetary system. Among the most powerful banking dynasties stood the House of Rothschild, who are a front family for the Sardinian Moorish Zionist Jews. Their networks spanned continents. Their wealth was legendary. They financed wars, propped up kingdoms, and some alleged toppled them. Their name became synonymous with the immense power of private finance. Proponents of a deeper conspiracy point to the Rothschilds as key players in the plot against Lincoln. His greenback policy challenged their system of central banking, a system where private banks controlled a nation's money supply. Lincoln's actions were a dangerous precedent, one that could inspire global financial independence. It is said that Meyer Amschel Rothschild once declared, "Permit me to issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who makes its laws." This sentiment captured the essence of their perceived power. Lincoln, by asserting government control over America's currency, was directly defying this dictum. A web of global power likely refers to a concept or idea describing the complex, interconnected nature of global power dynamics. It suggests that power is not solely held by a few actors, but rather distributed and exercised through a network of relationships, alliances, and influence, impacting various aspects of life beyond the economic realm. The idea emphasizes that different forms of power are intertwined and influence each other. Economic power, for example, can impact political and social power, and vice versa. It highlights that power extends beyond economic influence, encompassing political, social, technological, and other dimensions. The concept acknowledges that the international system has a hierarchical structure, with certain nations and actors wielding more influence than others. The geostructural analysis examines the interplay between a nation's geography and its position in the global hierarchy. The web can also include non-state actors like civil society groups, nonprofits, and the private sector, which can play a significant role in shaping global power dynamics. Organizations like the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, while lacking the power to enforce laws, can still exert influence through persuasion, coordination, and collaboration with other actors. In essence, a web of global power suggests a complex, multidimensional, and interconnected global system, where power is not solely held by states but is distributed and exercised through a network of relationships and influence, impacting various aspects of life beyond the economic realm. Allegations of a wider cabal, Moors, Zionists, and hidden agendas. The web of alleged conspiracy extends beyond a single banking family. Some researchers delve into more obscure connections, pointing to groups like the Sardinian Moors and early Zionist circles as part of a broader, underground elite. Some believe the Moorish Zionist guys have hidden agendas for world domination. These Zionists are often depicted as a threat to the world within the context of world control. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, This notorious document is presented as a so-called fraudulent text that purports to reveal the Moorish Zionist guys' plans for global control. The document alleges that these guys aim to achieve this dominance through various means, including sowing discord, inciting war, and undermining morality. It was first published in Imperial Russia in 1903 and was used to blame these guys for social and political unrest. Keep in mind, the Imperial Russia are these guys' enemy, like we said. So the Russians would use this as a tactic to expose their plans. Makes sense. So-called scholars have repeatedly shown that parts of the text are plagiarized from a French political satire and contain no evidence of a Jewish conspiracy. The protocols claim that Jewish people are working clandestinely to manipulate global events, including politics, economics, and media, to gain control over the world. The document alleges that these guys seek to weaken existing societal norms and structures, including through promotion of liberalism, communism, and other potentially disruptive forces. Some say the protocols are used to blame so-called these guys for various societal problems and misfortunes, such as economic instability, wars, and social unrest. The document includes themes like Moorish Zionist control over institutions, manipulation of information, and a hidden power structure. One of the goals was controlling the global economy and media. The concept of hidden agendas is suggesting that these groups operate in secret to achieve their purported goals. Plans like Agenda 21 and Rex 84, Moorish Zionist guys say the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a notorious forgery and a work of anti-Semitic propaganda trying to stop their plans for world peace. Unfortunately, the document continues to be circulated. Some claim another one of these guys' playbooks is Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma book. Morals and Dogma is a secretive text revealing Freemasonry's hidden agenda, particularly concerning Luciferianism or other occult practices. Some say the book itself is a collection of lectures and essays providing an encoded philosophical rationale for the Scottish Rite degrees only. Morals and Dogma draws on diverse sources, including comparative religion, history, and philosophy, to provide a broader understanding of Freemasonry's teachings. The book's descriptions of Lucifer and Baphomet, among other things, have contributed to the idea that Freemasonry is involved in occult practices. Pike was Satanist or Luciferian. What distinguishes Pike's work is its very eclectic nature and the author's frequent references to Lucifer sources. The Moorish Zionist guys have hidden agendas for world domination persist in many stories of people who come up missing. They persist in certain narratives of Lincoln's assassination. The theory posits that these diverse groups, though seemingly unrelated, shared common interests with international bankers, a desire for global influence and control over nations' destinies. The Sardinian Moors, some claim, had ancient ties to maritime power and secret knowledge, while certain early Zionist figures are portrayed as financial strategists working within the international banking system. These elements are woven together to depict a vast, coordinated network of hidden power brokers. Allegedly, the Moorish Zionist guys form a Hellfire Council. The Hellfire Council is a council of 13 lords of London who represent the most powerful family organizations in the underworld. They are the ultimate authority and maintain order within the world, even having influence over governments and law enforcement. The council is feared and respected by all, including a chain of major businesses which operates under their rules. They are the supreme authority in the underworld, with considerable influence over governments, militaries, and law enforcement around the world. They follow strict rules and practices, including the use of only the Holy Lands as a neutral ground for interactions between families. They enforce their rules and maintain order within the criminal underworld through various means, including adjudicators and harbingers. The Hellfire Council has significant influence over the world, with their members often having connections to powerful political figures and bureaucrats. It is considered the ultimate authority of the underworld and is feared and respected by all. The organizations represented by members of the Hellfire Council have many police forces, politicians, and bureaucrats around the world in their pockets, allowing them to conduct business with virtual impunity. The Hellfire Council was led by the elder known as Spartacus, who dwelled in the deserts of Morocco. Section 6. The American Charter, Sovereignty, and a Contested Amendment. Lincoln's vision extended beyond currency. He aimed to solidify American sovereignty in all its aspects. This included the very structure of its laws and its relationship with foreign powers. One persistent theory involves the alleged incorporation of the USA under English authority, a subtle, legalistic maneuver said to have occurred in the 19th century. This theory suggests that the original intent of the Founding Fathers was gradually subverted, that the United States of America, a republic of sovereign states, was transformed into a corporation, the USA Inc., potentially controlled by foreign interests, including those in the City of London, the world's financial center. Lincoln, it's argued, resisted this. Further complicating the narrative is the mystery surrounding the 13th Amendment. Not the one that abolished slavery, but an earlier proposed Titles of Nobility Amendment, ratified by some states before the war. It would have stripped citizenship from anyone accepting titles of nobility or honors from foreign powers. Sovereignty can generally be defined as supreme authority. Sovereignty entails hierarchy within a state as well as external autonomy for states. In any state, sovereignty is assigned to the person, body, or institution that has the ultimate authority over other people and to change existing laws. A contested amendment refers to a proposed constitutional amendment that faces significant opposition and debate, often involving disagreements over its meaning, impact, or legitimacy. This opposition can arise from various sources, including different political ideologies, interpretations of the Constitution, and concerns about potential consequences. Don't forget, Abe was a lawyer, so he knew the game. Check this out. Attorney with obligation to the courts and to the public, not to the client. And wherever the duties of his client conflict with those he owes as an officer of the court in the administration of justice, the former must yield to the later. Emphasis added. Corpus Juris Scandium, 1980, Vol. 7, heading, Attorney-Client, Sections 2, 3, and 4. C-Note. All attorneys owe their allegiance, first to the Crown of England, second to the courts, third to the public, and finally to their clients as wards of court. Is it any wonder your attorney never wins a case for you? BAR, acronym for British Accreditation Regency. Look up each of these words. Attorneys are members of the bar. The American Bar Association is a branch of the Bar Council, sole bar association in England. All laws, today in America, are copyrighted property of a British company. All state codes are private, commercial, British-owned law. All attorneys follow instruction from England attorney, twist and turn over their clients to the private law of the bankruptcy. That is their job. That is their pledge to those whom they owe allegiance. By definition, the obligations and duties of attorneys extend to the court and the public, government, before any mere client. Clients are wards of the court, and therefore persons of unsound mind. See also, client, wards of court, in the original 13 Inches Amendment. There was also another important issue involved in the War of 1812. The original 13 Inches Amendment prohibited attorneys and anyone with a title of nobility to hold any public office in America. All the states had ratified this 13 Inches Amendment except for Virginia. You'll note that the War of 1812 was waged mostly in Washington, D.C. The Moorish British Empire burned all the repository buildings, attempting to destroy all records of the new symbols of the social compact known as the United States of America, represented in Washington, D.C. by the United States and Congress assembled. Thus, the War of 1812 was partly waged to prevent the passage and enforcement of the new 13th Amendment. Most book repositories throughout the states were burned to the ground and all records destroyed. There's a famous painting in Washington, D.C. depicting the British Moors boarding a ship after they surrendered. The painting shows the British Moors carrying their rifles as they mounted the gangplank. One must ask, what army is allowed to keep their weapons after they surrender? One must also ask, who really won that war? As a result of the accumulated debt of waging that war, a new bank charter was issued for another 20 years. Ancient Orders and the Knights Templar Enigma. The layers of alleged grow deeper still, with the purported involvement of secret societies. Among them, the Knights Templar, an order with medieval roots, officially suppressed in the 14th century, but rumored to have survived in clandestine forms, wielding influence from the shadows. These Neo-Templar groups, it is claimed, along with other esoteric orders, were part of the hidden architecture of global power. Their goals, shrouded in secrecy, supposedly involved long-term plans for societal control and transformation. Lincoln, with his populist appeal and his strong national vision, represented a significant impediment to these shadowy agendas. The narrative suggests that John Wilkes Booth and his co-conspirators were not merely disgruntled Confederates, but potentially operatives, Knights of Templar, or unwitting tools of these more powerful, hidden organizations. Secret handshakes, symbols, and rituals are sometimes cited as evidence of their infiltration into American society and even into government circles. Some people are under the influence that the United States Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, started on September 18, 1947, when President Harry S. Truman signed the National Security Act of 1947 into law. This really was to secretly address the extraterrestrials they were coming across when they used the atomic bomb, but anyway, the CIA started a long time ago. It was started by more Zionist guys in Jerusalem sometime between AD 1118 and 1119 under the name the Knights Templar, who had an assassin's creed. The Knights Templar was an order of devout Christians after the First Crusade, 1096 to 1099. The order was created to protect Moorish Europeans traveling to the Holy Land, among other duties. The Grand Chessboard Lincoln, an obstacle to global dominion. The death of Abraham Lincoln was not an isolated event. It was a pivotal move on a grand chessboard played by underground elites for centuries. Their ultimate goal: global dominion, a new world order controlled by a select few. Lincoln, with his dedication to government of the people, was a formidable obstacle. His policies promoted national unity and economic independence. He embodied the spirit of resistance. Lincoln's success would have derailed this. Global dominion in the form of take over the world is a phrase that describes the concept of world domination or global domination, where a single authority or entity aims to hold power or control over all or most of the Earth's inhabitants. A nation or power expanding its influence through military might to make other nations subservient. An indirect form of rule where a leading state influences subordinate states through implied power, which can involve the threat of force, protection, or economic benefits. These often involve the idea of a secretive group of elites with a globalist agenda plotting to establish a totalitarian world government, replacing nation-states with a one-world authority. Dominion itself means total control or power. In some religious contexts, like dominion theology, the term refers to the interpretation of Genesis 1:28 as a mandate for Christian stewardship in civil affairs and potentially establishing a global Christian theocracy. Historically, various rulers and regimes have attempted to achieve global conquest, but it has never been fully realized. However, some argue that the United States has achieved a form of global hegemony since 1945 or 1991, and the British Empire did so in the 19th century. The latter is an indirect form of rule by the hegemon, leading state, over subordinate states. The hegemon's implied power includes the threat of force, protection, or bestowal of economic benefits. Forces resisting attempted or existing hegemony strive to preserve or restore a multipolar balance of power. Hegemony is the political, economic, and military predominance of one state over other states, either regional or global. In ancient Greece, say 8th BC AD 6th C, hegemony denoted the politico-military dominance of the hegemon city-state over other city-states. In the 19th century, hegemony denoted the social or cultural predominance or ascendancy, predominance by one group within a society or milieu, and a group or regime which exerts undue influence within a society. In imperialism, the hegemonic order dictates the internal politics and the societal character of the subordinate states that constitute the hegemonic sphere of influence, either by an internal, sponsored government or by an external, installed government. Imperialism is the maintaining and extending of power over foreign nations, particularly through expansionism, employing both hard power, military and economic power, and soft power, diplomatic power and cultural imperialism. Imperialism focuses on establishing or maintaining hegemony and a more or less formal empire. While related to the concept of colonialism, imperialism is a distinct concept that can apply to other forms of expansion and many forms of government. Colonialism is the control of another territory, natural resources and people by a foreign group. Colonizers control the political and tribal power of the colonized territory. While frequently an imperialist project, colonialism can also take the form of settler colonialism, whereby settlers from one or multiple colonizing metropoles occupy a territory with the intention of partially or completely supplanting the existing population. Colonialism developed as a concept describing European colonial empires of the modern era, which spread globally from the 15th century to the mid-20th century, spanning 35% of Earth's land by 1800 and peaking at 84% by the beginning of World War I. European colonialism employed mercantilism and chartered companies, and established coloniality, which keeps the colonized socio-economically othered and subaltern through modern biopolitics of sexuality, gender, race, disability, and class, among others, resulting in intersectional violence and discrimination. Colonialism has been justified with beliefs of having a civilizing mission to cultivate land and life based on beliefs of entitlement and superiority, historically often rooted in the belief of a Christian mission. Radical Republicans feared the president's purported mild plans for Reconstruction. Lincoln had pursued a more lenient approach to bringing the Southern states back into the Union. Those who wanted to see the Confederacy punished more severely might have become frustrated and considered extreme measures. Even if the war had ended, those who deeply resented the Union's victory and the abolition of slavery might have seen Lincoln as the embodiment of their loss and sought revenge. Fear of Lincoln's growing power or influence. Lincoln's presidency had continued and he had successfully implemented his Reconstruction policies. He might have become an even more powerful and influential figure, potentially threatening the agendas of certain political groups. Concerns about future policy directions. Some might have feared that Lincoln would become increasingly radical in his policies or pursue actions that they found unacceptable. Discontent with Lincoln's personal character or actions. Beyond his political role, there could have been individuals who held personal grudges against Lincoln for various reasons. Those with deeply held opposing beliefs to Lincoln's might have seen his existence as a threat to their way of life or ideology. The Illuminati secret organization saw Lincoln as an obstacle to their goals and wanted him removed. The Moorish Zionist guise foreign powers potentially wanting Lincoln out of the way for their own strategic reasons. The national banking system, a period from 1863 to 1913, established federally chartered national banks that were required to purchase U.S. government bonds to back their issued currency, the national bank notes. The system aimed to create a uniform national currency, support the Civil War effort by selling bonds, and reduce the instability of state-chartered banks. Mr. Abraham Lincoln was, during his presidency, an advocate of establishing a strong national banking system. He worked to that end throughout the Civil War, and eventually he supported the passage of the National Bank Act in 1863, also called the National Currency Act, which established the office of the Comptroller of the Currency, proposed to back the national currency by government securities, and provided for the establishment of a system of national banks that would be required to purchase government bonds to back the notes that the banks issued. Before, these banks had been mostly state-chartered and only very lightly regulated, if regulated at all, and there had been many problems with that system. Banks failed on a regular basis during the 19th century, and depositors lost all of their money. The first major banking panic was in 1819, when the Napoleonic Wars came to a conclusion and demand for U.S. agricultural products dropped, and at the same time an asset bubble which had developed due to wild and widespread speculation in U.S. land prices also collapsed. But there were many runs on U.S. banks and many banking panics. Eventually, the system established in this way became the Federal Reserve System, but that wasn't until 1913, and there were many more problems along the way. Lincoln was aiming in this way to solve the economic problems that the nation faced during the Civil War, of course, since the Civil War was extremely costly. The Union issued 1040s and compound interest notes during the war, as well as greenbacks. But Lincoln believed that a stable national banking system would be beneficial to the economy in any case. He likely would have supported it even in the absence of the Civil War, but that was not to be. Lincoln bankrupted them in 1865, so they had to refile in 1871. In 1871, the default again loomed, and bankruptcy was imminent. So, in 1871, the assumed 10 miles square was incorporated in England. The new military social construct of the United States was still operating under the old familiar known social compact agency name, as the United States in Congress assembled, which used the Constitution as their bylaws, not as authority under the Constitution, but as authority over the Constitution. They copyrighted not only the Constitution, but also many names such as the United States U.S., the United States of America USA, and many other titles as their own intellectual property, and secured such property rights by copyright. This is the final blow to the original Constitution, as applicable to the trust operating under the U.S. Constitution for the beneficiaries of the original signatories of the Social Compact, created for their benefit by their forefathers. From here on out, the United States was governed entirely by foreign to the law established by the Social Compact, private corporate law, dictated by the bankers as fiscal agents for the private creditors of the intellectual property which they now held in, and under copyright with the creditors extending the right to use such copyright to their esquires by and through the Crown's British Accreditation Registry, bar international agents, attorneys, in association with the Vatican by treaty as the exchequer of the Vatican Treasury. Then, in 1909, default loomed once more. The U.S. government went to the Crown of England and asked for an extension of time. This extension was granted for another 20 years on several conditions. One of the conditions was that the United States were forced to allow the creditors to establish a new national bank. This was done in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Bank. Along with the 16th Amendment, the collection of income tax, enacted February 25, 1913, and the 17th Amendment, enacted May 31, 1913, were the conditions for the continuing extension of time allowed by the creditors for the United States to continue to exist as a functioning entity within the international public order. The 16 and 17 inches amendment further reduced the state's power by removing the state legislative right to appoint senators directly. The United States adopted the Babylonian system, that being the most clever way to control the mob of people collectively, to keep and control political power, thereby controlling any future attempt by contractual obligations, the ability by the beneficiaries to attempt to overcome and to restore the former system of government to which their forefathers had sacrificed their lives, wealth, and their sacred honor to give them. Whether or not their forefathers' actions were right or wrong, the fruit of their labor still exists, with those of us who still study our predecessors' actions for the benefit of hopefully avoiding the same mistakes. Echoes of Ford's Theater, a legacy under shadow. The shot that killed Lincoln still echoes through American history. Its reverberations are felt not just in the loss of a great leader, but in the lingering questions about who truly wielded power, and for what ends. The official narrative may be settled, but for many the case remains disturbingly open, a cold case of immense proportions. The influence of elite banking interests did not end in 1865. The debate over national currency and the role of private central banks continued for decades, culminating in the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, an institution, some argue, that realized the very system Lincoln fought so hard against. The struggle for financial sovereignty is a persistent theme. The theories surrounding Lincoln's death, however controversial, serve as a stark reminder to question official narratives, to look beyond the surface, and to consider the possibility of hidden forces shaping historical events. They compel us to examine the nature of power and the lengths to which some might go to protect their interests. And yet we can document that Mr. George Washington did not chop down a cherry tree. Mr. Abraham Lincoln did not free the slaves. They became subjects of the Federal District, the District of Columbia. The war with Mexico was begun by a general, Mr. Zachary Taylor's provocations along the Nueces River. The battleship Maine blew up from the inside. Mr. Woodrow Wilson knew that the ship known as the Lusitania was carrying United States citizens. We got more coming out soon. Hit that like button and subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Thanks for tuning in, family. Stay tuned. Check back with us every day for new content.